Yeah, so I'm David Frank Weymiller. My parents are Franklin Doc Weymiller, they call him Doc, and Jean Ann Weymiller, Jean Ann Cooper Weymiller.
And I'm Lori, and we've been married 38 years this year, and I was Lori Fahey. My mom and dad are Keith and Fran Fahey, farmers out in Waukon. So, yeah, we have 4 kids. Ross is married to Morgan, and they have 3 children, Titan, Sam, and Janessa. And then we have Frank and Kelsey. I should go in order. Angela is married to David Gibbs. He's a vet over at Postville. And they have 4 kids. They've got Brant, Vinny, Barrett, and Vienna.
Yes,
Yeah.
and then we have Frank and Kelsey.
And we have Frank and Kelsey.
And they have a little boy named Bo.
Yes. And then we have Marcus, and he's a student at UNI, and he's a running back for the UNI Panthers
Football team.
football team.
And he's still in school. He'll graduate in December,
Yeah,
and he's looking at law school. So,
that's right. Yeah, yes.
and the 2 boys are involved with us in the farming operation.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like she said, Angela's married to a veterinarian, so ag has been key to our families. And we'll see what Marcus does.
Yeah,
Every farmer needs a lawyer now, I guess.
I guess, yeah.
Well, we were both raised on farms.
I was on a dairy farm outside of Northeast Iowa, so I came from a farm.
Yep, and all of my first memories are on a farm where my dad still lives, down by Harper's.
And we met.
We met at the county fair showing beef cattle together and had lunch, and the rest is history.
Yeah. So, then you went to school at Iowa State, and
I went off.
I worked while you went to school.
Yeah, and we got married about
1980.
halfway through college for me. The farm economy was pretty rough, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to farm, and so I decided to stay in school and get a 4-year degree. And then we came home in 1982. We came to this farm because my uncle never had any children and had quite a large spread. So
Louie and Karen.
yeah, Louie and Karen Weymiller, and started out doing what he was doing, raising a few beef cattle and crops, and had a few pigs, and just kept growing the pig operation.
Yeah. And I stayed home and did some part-time work, helped my dad out in the feed store. So just kind of part-time, 3 days a week or whatever, but moved into that big old farmhouse, and it took a lot of work to clean that up, and so we did that.
Yeah, and especially it was kind of tough because we didn't own anything. We were working for my uncle, and didn't have any money, of course. We just graduated from school, and it was a bad farm economy to start farming. The interest was 16-17%. But eventually we borrowed some money and started growing the operation with my uncle. And by 1995, he was ready to get out, and he sold me the cows. And 97, he sold us the house and one of the farms, and we had purchased a farm a few years before that across the river and did most of the pig operation over there. Had a couple hundred sows. Produced the best year I ever did was the last year, I think 1997. We produced about 4,000 pigs, and we thought that was unbelievable.
And you had long days and long nights because we had no hired help and a lot of outside work, and just, yeah.
It was back when you couldn't eat enough in a day because you were working 24/7. So We'll jump right up to 1998, 99. The hog market fell apart and we had to do something.
I went to work in town because we thought we had to do something. Marcus went to the neighbors.
Yeah, and I decided to build a 600 sow contract farrowing confinement facility. And you did work in there also.
Well, I when you built that, then I decided to quit work and come home and help him. I remember working in there one day and I was like cleaning up the dead pigs and I was like, I can't believe I left my office job to pick up and clean dead pigs. And then Marcus would come in with us to the hog unit and we'd bring his Hot Wheel in.
3-4 years old.
Yep, he was 3-4 years old, and he'd ride his Hot Wheel down the aisles of the pigs while we were working, up and down. Or he'd color in the office. The kids would come home and they'd color in the office and help us out too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
We never had a day off because we were always in the hog unit.
7 days a week.
7
It's
days
about
a
like
week.
milking cows.
Yeah.
And eventually, 2 years later, we took it to 1,500 sows where I had some hired help. And then we could try and get weekends off. And eventually, Ross had gone off to college and he came home in 2005 and started working in there. In 2008, we went to 4,000 sows and I had like 8 employees, and then it led all the way up to.
Well, yeah, eventually then I came out of there because we had so much help, but I still would do the bookwork at the house for, the hog unit, the payroll, things like that. And then eventually you were out of there, right?
Yeah, after Ross was home a year or so, he kept running the swine facility and I did more of the outside stuff, and we rented more land and started running 1,000 to 1,500 acres of corn, and about half rented and half owned, and things just kept growing. And eventually last year we went to 6,000 sows, which is about as big as we can be. Frank came home in 2012, my second son, and
You started working in there.
yeah. And of course Angela married a veterinarian, so we kind of all stayed rural.
So David's our vet for their beef cattle, and that's really nice too.
We grew the beef herd a little bit too. We're about 170 cows, 50 to 70 cows more than what we were.
Yeah. What's nice about the beef cattle too, though, you share help with his dad and his uncle or his brother. So they all come up and they help, or we go down there and we help each other work cattle, and
It's a little bit of camaraderie along
yeah,
with
do
the
the
work.
lunch and do the whole family thing, and yeah.
Do the sweet corn together, but the big thing is deer hunting.
Yeah.
That's kind of like our reward for being farmers. We get to deer hunt at the end of the year because we have a lot of rough ground that the cattle graze, but there's also a lot of wildlife on it.
Yeah, and we used to deer hunt, or you used to feed everybody in the old
Cement block shed.
cement block shed. And get around the wood stove and
Tell stories.
Yeah, tell stories, and all the little kids would come in. It was just a real family thing, So yeah, that's just really. And all the women then make all the food, and we feed them all, and yeah, that's a pretty good tradition. That's what you guys.
Well, my dad's 83 and 84 now, and he still deer hunts and helps work cattle and run the combine on their operation. And
Yeah. But Frank, then, when he came home, then he started working in there with Ross, and then we rented more land, and the Gibbs farm then.
in 2009, we bought a 600-acre farm, mostly rough ground, our deer hunting farm, but it does have cropland and value for the beef cattle. So.
But there's we do a lot of hiking. I think of Marcus and them. He was constantly going up into the Gibbs farm and walking through it. He'd be gone all day with his cousin.
And Marcus too, yeah. Or did you say Marcus?
Marcus, yeah.
So back to the beginning, it's kind of like it wasn't really the love of farming that brought us here. It was just like more of the love of the outdoors. Like I wanted to be outside. I thought about fisheries and wildlife and that kind of thing, but by default I ended up on a farm, and I always say farming's a great way of life if everything goes right. And of course everything doesn't go right, but when it does, it's enjoyable, you know, and especially if you're raising your family, kids can be outside.
Yeah, and I think we've had to go through so many things. We've had to go through a big flood, we've had to go through a big fire, but through it all, we've had such strong faith, I think, and our perseverance to just keep going and to show our kids that, you know, you can make it through these hard times, and if you've got the family and your faith.
Well, there's a scripture that says, when God's on your side, who can stand against you? So you have to keep remembering that.
Yeah. So we've kind of gone through some really tough times, but we've made it through it, right?
Right, so far.
So far, yeah.
We've only been married 39 years coming up.
Yes.
Yeah, 38
years we've been married. So, yeah. So we're just hoping that, you know, that the tradition of the hunting and, you know, just appreciate the outdoors and the beauty of this land, and that all our grandkids and our kids will, you know, appreciate it and enjoy it and realize what they've got here.
It's a fringe benefit of farming especially in this area with all the rivers and streams and hills, and the beauty and outdoors is there, and you're in it every day, so you got to stop and take advantage of it. And just like she took a picture of the sunrise this morning, just because it's there, and you don't want to miss it, because otherwise life goes by way too fast.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure where the story really begins, but I know the first Weymiller came over here to America in the early 1800s, and my great-grandfather was a descendant, son, I believe. His name was Frank Weymiller, and this is him in a local bank, probably in the 40s or 50s. I think he passed away in 55, but this is when he sold out in 1920.
This farm right here, right?
Yeah, on this farm right across the road, and you know, you can see he had 3 horses and 23 cattle and a few pigs, and that was a big operation probably back in the day. And then when my uncle sold out, you know, we had a 4-row planter and you know, maybe 100 beef cows, and you know, here we are sitting on 6,000 pigs and, you know, a couple thousand acres of land. And I don't know where it'll be in another 50 years, but things have definitely progressed through the years, for sure, through the generations, but still ag orientated. Mm-hmm. So, you know, a few things in the office here. I mean, even the yields, I don't know if this will show up, but I think we started getting in the 200 bushels in 1990, 89, 90, 91. We started getting over 200 bushels an acre. I believe my dad was the first one to grow 100 bushels an acre back in the mid-70s. You know, and 2010, we're at 276. I don't know where the potential is. They taught us in college that the potential is 600 bushels an acre if you get 5 or 6 years an acre, but now we're doing it with 1 year and we're getting 300 bushels in some places. So productivity, even with the pigs, my great-grandfather used to take 1 sow down into the islands, a couple sows, and put them on an island, and they'd get 2 or 3 pigs per sow. They were bred. When they took them down, they'd come back in the fall and pick them up. You know, now we're approaching 30 pigs per bred sow a year, having 2.5 litters at 12 or 13 pigs. So productivity of the American farmer is unparalleled in any other industry as far as I'm concerned. When Ross came home from college, he took some business courses, and he talked about having a business model and vision, and so I don't know if it was really based off that, but this has always been my vision. So I wrote it down about 10, 15 years ago, and I think that's something that is what we base our lives on. not just in farming, but life in general. A lot of history on that board, you know, obviously things we're proud of and things we like to do, the deer hunting crew, of course, and the Owl's Head, we'll talk about that more later, but the first settlers settled up on the Owl's Head. I think claimed land. The second claim for land in Elmicky County was 1857, was right up there, up the road on our farm. And of course there was no cedar trees back then, so there's no, and he had sheep, so they ate everything, I guess. But the hill was bare then. The deer hunting crew has been the same set of guys since I was first deer season, pretty much. Just descendants of the original crews. And my dad's the only one left of the original crew. He's 84 years old and still hunts. There's been a few proud moments with the boys there, and you can see they're passing it on to the next generation. Ross started hunting with me when he was 3 years old, and Titan started when he was 3 or 4, going along on the hunts, and it's just one of the perks of being a farmer in a rough country. Up on top there, I guess, I don't know if you caught that, but that was my dad's farm in probably about 1978. And that was pretty much a high-end production farm in '78. Yeah, you know, until 2012 we didn't even have a shop. But now we look at, you know, the price of this shop is about the cost of one tractor. And the shop will be here forever. The tractors wore out in 5 years, and the price of equipment is just nice to keep it inside and keep it clean and make it last longer. We got a few deer heads up on the wall. Just a few racks. Some of these just weren't, I mean, we have a lot of big ones in our houses, each of us, but and all the deer hunting crew has a few head mounts.
I think they're getting too many CNAs.
There's plenty of room in the shop.
Yeah.
But this is kind of our farming area right here, our fields along the Upper Iowa River. A lot of hills and bluffs here. Our land goes up into here. It's a great grazing area for the cattle, and we got some bottom ground for the corn, and the sow unit and the shop and stuff are right in this area. And great deer hunting country. This was from a state championship playoff game with Marcus when I think he was a senior, right?
He's a senior.
And as soon as I saw that picture, I said, someday this kid's gonna say, I almost tackled Marcus Weymiller once. I don't know who he is. Well, it kind of all started here with us up at the house there in 1982 is where we moved into. And of course, almost none of these bins were here. That bin with the auger only had 4 rings. And then we added 3 rings, and then we added 3 more later on. And eventually all these bins kind of grew here as our operation grew. The shop kind of sits where we used to have open lots for the hogs outside, and that's what laid out here. About the only thing left is a little cattle shed up there of the original site and the house. The land we bought in 2009 goes up that valley about a mile and off to the right, but that's one of the largest part of the state of Iowa without a gravel road through it. Between what the neighbors own and us, there's 5,000 or 6,000 acres there uninhabited. The original farm of my uncle and my great-grandfather was across the road here, and it's exactly as it was since 1960, except for the harvester was added in 1974. In the recent floods, this was all underwater in 2008, 2013, and 2016. And the high water mark is really on that far telephone pole. You can see there's a shiny coon guard on it because there was a wood duck house on it, but it was above that shiny guard. So there was probably 6 or 8 feet of water out on this field and up around those buildings. So my great-grandfather cleared this bottom by hand.
Shut the radio.
I'm not sure of the time frame, but probably in the 1930s. This was all grown up in trees, and there was a swamp there, and they said that it could never be farmed, but he figured out how to, he dug a drainage ditch around it and figured out how to farm this bottom here. This was a county road, a through road, until 1995. They shut the bridge. Valentine's Day, I remember 1995, they came down and bolted the bridge shut, and this became a dead end. And so there was an old farmhouse back here, and we ended up building a 600 sow unit here in '99, and then of course going to the 1500 sows, and it's currently a 6,000 sow complex, and we do purebred genetics for Rikesview Farms. And right here where the trailer sits is where the old Craner house, which was a hired man for the farm back here. So this has come quite a ways too in the over the last 18 years. We know Marcus plays for the Panthers now, but we call this facility Cyclone 1 Swine. All of this area over here was open lots for cattle and hogs, and we kind of tore it out when we tore the shop out, and we put a working facility back in to run the cattle through the chute. A couple of those pine trees up there we planted when we moved up here and had a whole grove of them, but only a handful survived. So yeah, we got to move into this house in 1997. My aunt and uncle retired and moved to town, and we lived over there for the last 21 years, and Ross and Morgan just moved in there this fall. So it's a nice transition of the generations to stay on the farm. And we're moving way off the farm, about a couple hundred feet up the road, and building a house. The grandkids discovered this fall that after the flood 2 years ago, some fish had washed into this pond, and they put out a minnow trap and were catching minnows of bluegills and bass. And so Titan went home. He's 8 years old, and he put a worm on a hook and threw it out there, and he caught a bass about 10 inches long. So yeah, whenever he jumps off the bus, he grabs the four-wheeler or the Ranger and comes up here fishing every night after school. A regular Tom Sawyer, I guess. So one benefit of the flood was we now have a pond stocked with fish, if we can figure out how to keep them alive through the winters. The geese started hatching out here about 10 years ago, and they've just grown in numbers, and we don't shoot them on the pond, we don't hunt them here. It's kind of a little sanctuary for them. I always said it's almost like God's country here, or that's what we call it. It is God's country. Great area for grazing and wildlife. And one unique thing about this road, when they shut the bridge in '95, is there's no high lines or anything coming down it. And everybody says it's such a pretty drive, and I think that's partially why. We planted cover crops over here. We've been doing that wherever we put manure. We'll put a cover crop on in the fall, and the idea is that the growing crop sucks up the nutrients and stabilizes them so we don't lose them for the corn we plant next year. And it's also a great attractant to the deer. They really move in here and feed on it. It's winter rye. A lot of guys will plant a 1/10 of an acre or something. We got about 40 acres of deer food here. So the good thing about living on a dead end is you limit the traffic and all, and the bad thing is we have about 1.5 miles of a road. We got to fence both sides. So We're starting to feed the cattle a little bit of silage just to bring the calves in and get them accustomed to eating before we wean the calves here in the next week or two. This is the landmark hill called the Owl's Head, where there was no cedar trees when it was first settled, and then the settler, he had sheep that he had driven here all the way from Ohio, and he settled in this area. And it's kind of rugged and sandy here, and someone asked him, why didn't you pick more suitable land? And he replied, it suits me just fine. The sign here, we wrote it. I don't know if the writing's still on there. This summer we put that up for the 4th of July. The farmers catch a lot of flack for ronin trout streams. Well, Almaquee County only had one natural producing stream, and when the confinement animal operation started, like ours, and now all 7 of them are viable trout streams, naturally producing. So I think that we should get a little credit for cleaning up the environment rather than the other way around. So this farm here we bought in 1987 because I wanted a place to raise pigs, and it had some hog buildings on, and we never did move over here while we raised pigs here, and this was the main center of our hog operation. And I always kind of wanted to live in this house. Well, we got our wish granted, and this year we're going to live here over the winter while we build. This was kind of the home of our couple hundred sows, and we used these buildings for quite a long time, and it was kind of a modern setup for the day during the 70s and 80s, into the 90s, and we even used that confinement building after we built the sow unit for a while, but now of course they're all outdated. But we had 200 to 300 sows here at one time. Now everybody wants the barns just to take them down and use the barn board, and I can't imagine the guys that built them, how upset they would be if they knew 100 years later they were, or 50 years, or however long it is, that they're junk now, or at least not useful for farming. So yeah, we lived in this house here for 21 years after my aunt and uncle moved out. They wanted to meet with us one day, and we didn't know why, and they said, we want to sell you the house and the farm. And we're like, what? You're going to move out of your house? I mean, it just took us by shock, and we didn't think we could ever swing it. But I guess God does the impossible, because we had no financing, but they set it up. They financed us to buy this and their farm, and it worked out. Yeah, we really wonder what we did before we had four-wheelers and Rangers, because it'd take all day to drive a pickup up into the woods, you know, and carry your fencing stuff out. You kind of go fencing for the day, because you couldn't just jump on a four-wheeler and throw your stuff on and run up there in 10 minutes. It took a while to get back through here and get to the fence and get your supplies there. Whenever we need a new fence put in, we hire it done. It's just, they do it so much faster than we can get it done.
Silage piles.
Yeah, that's our cattle winter feed there. Corn silage. The coon and the deer raise heck with it. They chew on it, and squirrels even. Usually the person in the middle is the smartest, because they don't have to get out and open the gate.
Yeah, that's right.
This creek is Clark's Creek. It starts about a mile up the valley, and then it's spring fed, and it's already this much water coming out of it. It's one of the most pristine streams in Iowa, I'm sure, because it's all spring fed.
Yeah.
Gets a little crazy when you get a lot of rain. Changes a lot.
So let's not get stuck.
said that. That's why I brought the radio. We can always call Superman.
Yeah.
The hired man, we call him Superman because he comes and rescues us all the time. We need a tractor over here. I'll get right on it. Like 450 acres of this farm was timber when we bought it in '09, and so we had it timber managed, timber stand improvement. They go in and cut the undesirable trees to open up the sun for the better trees and get the more of the hardwoods, the oaks and the walnuts and maples, hard maple and stuff growing. And so it's kind of a wilderness up here because a lot of the undergrowth is young trees and brush coming up now, but it makes excellent browse for the deer, and that's why we have so many deer up here. There are 150 acres of cropland up here, but it's been really hard to get a seeding established because when you do your new seeding with the alfalfa, they come in and eat it off so bad it can't get it to grow. We probably lose about 30 acres of corn every year to the deer up here.
How many deer did they think were up here from the deer management?
Well, there's probably 200 to 300 living on this
Yeah.
farm
200
right in this
deer.
area alone, and this, you know, counting the neighbors, 1,000-acre area basically.
Yeah.
But this road's about 3/4 of a mile long to get to the top. If you want to train for a tough mudder, it's a good road to run. It's kind of straight up, a gradual incline all the way up for 3/4 of a mile. You get to the top and it's a mile-long ridge. Yeah, so right now we're probably in one of the remote spots in in the state of Iowa. Between the neighbors up here, there's probably 5,000 acres up here of rough land and cropland that has no gravel road or public access to it. We call it the Little Oxbow of Iowa. But back through this road, there's an 8-acre field, and we call it the preserve, where the deer hang out. And we have trouble actually raising crops. There's so many deer up in this country, but there's 500 or 600 acres of woods surrounding it. We bought this in '09, and just love coming up here, knowing that you're miles and miles away from any other humans when you're up here. We had it timber managed over the last several years, and trying to improve the habitat and improve the environment here with getting the right kind of trees growing, some hardwoods. And it was logged previous to our ownership in 1988, and they took it down to nothing, so it started over as a forest growing mainly softwoods and popple and that type of stuff. So our goal is to get it back to a normal state of oaks and walnuts and hard maple and that type of thing.
Right.
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 You could hike up in this country and never see a human probably for a couple days and never step in the same area twice. Especially this time of year, there's a lot of briars and stuff, but at least the underbrush is down where you don't have to worry so much about stepping on a rattlesnake. When Elmwood County was just being settled, there was some horse thieves that had a camp up here. And the guy's last name, I believe, was Clark. That's why they call the creek Clark's Creek. And supposedly they had a hideout up in this country, which I imagine was a long ways from any civilization.
Yeah.
And they had fresh water here for their horses and stuff. And they must have, I don't know if somebody lived here, if there was ever a house or anything back here, but there was an apple orchard planted here. It's still here. A lot of apple trees, and this creek only starts right here.
Where did the spring start?
Spring, and it really flows out of this hill here. So yeah, the spring, they call it Collins Spring because the Collins family had owned this back in, I don't know, maybe the first settlers.
Yeah.
But it dumps into Clark's Creek, which Clark's Creek is called Clark's Creek because of the the horse thief, his last name was Clark, I guess, and they had a little encampment up here somewhere where they'd steal their horses and bring them up here, I guess, back in the mid 1800s or whenever people started settling the county. But our family has always come back to the spring. We hunt mushrooms back here. When the kids were little, we used to camp here, and there used to be a dipper that my great-grandfather had hung on the tree, and then my grandfather used it, my uncle used it, and we'd dip out of the spring. We don't leave it back here anymore. It's kind of an aluminum dipper cup.
Yeah.
Should bring it back out here, I guess. But
Yeah.
so the grandkids were all up here this spring, and they just kind of wandered and explored up through here. They had a blast. But all this water starts right here. It comes out of this hill.
Yeah.
My uncle said we should sell the water out of here, and that was before there was bottled water. And I thought, who's going to buy water? Wow. I guess he was ahead of his time.
Yeah.
Well, another landmark on the farm is the Eagle's Nest, and it's one of the original Eagle's Nests in Elmwood County. It's been here as long as I can remember, at least 30 years. And it moves a little bit every so many years. It does fall out of the tree. They get so heavy, the branches, it breaks the branches down, and then they'll just build it in another tree pretty close to the same area. And every year there's between 1 and 3 eagles. I don't know if I've ever seen 3, but definitely 2. Yeah, I guess one year there was 3, because all 3 of them, when they fly out, sometimes they end up down, they just take wing and they end up down by the feedlot. One day I was checking the cattle down there, and I was walking along, and all of a sudden I'm looking, and I'm like this far away, about 5 feet from a young eagle sitting on a fence post looking at me, and we just looked at each other, and I walked away, and you know, I could see the mother flying around. It must have just come out of the nest. It takes them a few years, I think 4 or 5 years before they get their white head entirely. You can come up under the nest and find little skulls and bones and figure out what they've been eating. But they say they'll weigh up to 1,000 pounds, those nests, when they get really big. But looks like that's a dead tree, so I don't know how much longer that nest will sit in that tree. The Weymiller, they trace it back to a specific area in Germany, which I can't tell you where it is, but it's supposedly a nobleman's castle. Was by a nunnery. Supposedly a nun gave birth to a child from the nobleman in the castle, and she felt so guilty she put the baby in a basket and put it in the moat around the castle like Moses. And then she disappeared, and they never found her until like 20 years later. They drained the moat, and she had weighted herself down and drowned herself in the moat where she had put the baby. And the family, the nobleman's family, took the baby in and raised it as their own. Of course, it was one of their sons. And he took the surname from both families, and it was Weymiller, which meant drawn from the water, or something of that nature. And then he set off on his own, and that was in the mid to late 1600s, and then his descendant is one of the Weymillers that came to America. And there are still Weymillers or Weymillers in Germany. So kind of a neat little story of how the family started, I guess. So that's kind of the overlay of how our life is laid out, I guess, but mainly the farm life, and how our operation grew, and we passed it on, or we're passing it on to the next generation, and hopefully they pass it on to someone in their family, and if not, I guess that's the way it is. But life goes on, and I can't imagine what the first settlers in this area would think today. But it's changed so much just in our time.
That's right, yeah.
Long ways from a sale with 3 horses and 23 head of cattle, which was probably big in 1920.
Yeah.
So see what happens in the future.
See what happens in the future, that's right. Enjoy it while we can.
Yeah, we plan on just moving up the road to a new house and I guess so we can witness the transitions and the next generations and stay there as long as we can.
There you go. Yes, yes.